This is the heaviest season of geopolitics, not only since CutTheClutter started, which was about 4 years ago, but in fact, since the end of the Cold War, since the events of 1989-90. And you know what I'm referring to, what's happening in Ukraine, Russia, where is China headed, China-US relationship, Chinese troops sitting on India's borders, that has a larger geopolitical message, the change in Afghanistan, and on top of all this, Imran Khan going to Moscow in a week when Moscow is nearly at war with a lot of the rest of the world, particularly Europe and America. And also he becomes the first Pakistani Prime Minister to go to Moscow after 23 years. This has been a very frozen relationship. And now there is a thawing. Now I thought, this is also the election season, lots of politics is going on, but politics we can talk about at any point of time. And I think you will get an overdose of politics over the next week or two. Also, politics is safe because so many people say so many things that I can also say something. And at the end of the day, nobody might hold me to where I may have gone wrong, and where I've gone right, I can say, see, I said such and such. So let's leave politics aside right now. That is too domestic, too provincial, and too parochial. Let's look at the state of the world because that affects all of us. Now, big things have happened. I thought today I will talk about the impact of the sanctions on Russia and what it means for all the other countries. But then I thought that maybe Imran Khan going to Moscow is a bigger immediate story, and we will talk about that because that has geopolitical implications too. Because you know what? This is also interesting timing. This is the 50 years of Shanghai Accord. Shanghai Accord is what the Americans, that is Nixon, Kissinger, and the Chinese under Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai, they signed that accord to basically normalize US-China relations. The normalization of US-China relations then led to People's Republic of China taking the slot of China at United Nations. Originally, it was given to what is today Taiwan, right? So they became the legitimate inheritors of the power called China. That is what changed geopolitics then, and that is what ultimately led to the end of the Cold War and defeat of Soviet Union, or as extended Russia or the Russian Empire was known until then. Now, I am very deliberately using the expression Russian Empire for Soviet Union because that is the comparison that Putin has drawn in his lecture, because he is in fact held Soviet Union and communism responsible for a few weaknesses of the system, for why that federation collapsed, but he's harked back to the Russian Empire. So Russian Empire in 1971 was the Soviet Union. Americans were ranged against it. That was the Cold War. They found an ally in China, which was an estranged friend of Russia's, estranged, quote unquote, iron brother of Soviet Union. So that relationship had broken down. Again, the same principle, enemy may be your friend, but enemy's estranged brother is much more vicious and much more effective than even a normal enemy. Now, who made that possible? We have to understand that. That outreach for America to China, that was made possible by Pakistan, by Yahya Khan and Bhutto's Pakistan. They are the ones who enabled that secret trip by Pakistan into Beijing, and Americans were grateful to Pakistan for that, and that then started a new phase in Pakistan-China relations that went on and on. Now, this is the 50th anniversary of the US-China Accord that came as a result of this, the Shanghai Accord. It is on the 50th anniversary that now Imran Khan is going to Moscow. So think of the global situation again. And it's so fascinating because it's really history repeating itself in a very different way. The cast of characters is the same, the equations have changed. Then it was a case of America reaching out to China to isolate Russia. Today, China has reached out to Russia to isolate America. So America now is ranged against China and Russia. In the process, Pakistan has got involved. I think I'd used the example earlier. That's a bit like in old days, if you bought a big box of surf, they gave you a cake of Lux free, right? So Pakistan has gone like a freebie in this equation. But again, see how history has turned a full circle. In 1971, Pakistan brokered and facilitated America's outreach to the Chinese. And they facilitated that with the Americans and the Chinese. They offered their good offices to both. Today, it is the Chinese who have offered their good offices to facilitate and enable this Pakistani outreach to Moscow. So Chinese have worked both on Pakistan and Moscow. That's the reason I say that in 50 years, that cycle has turned fully. Now, in fact, a lot of the evidence that we have for this also comes from an interview that Imran Khan has given to Russia Today. Now, Russia Today is a very slickly produced TV channel. It's on my package also. I watch it often. This is also Russian government propaganda. It was set up by people close to Vladimir Putin, including Alexei Gromov, who still happens to be on his staff, and Michael Leskin, who's passed away now. He was media minister and media spokesman for Putin. And Putin, I think in 2005 or 6, had also declared RT, Russia Today, formerly called Russia Today, also to be to an institution of strategic importance. And there are times when RT editors have said that we are like the Ministry of Defense, because when the fighting took place in Georgia, they functioned pretty much like a channel for disinformation. Now, you can see RT. If you watch RT, you know what the Russian government wants to tell the world. So RT in many ways is like Global Times is to the rest of the world on behalf of China, except it is not as funny as Global Times. Global Times is very funny. RT pretends to be very serious and employs very good journalists, very efficient journalists, very competent and very professional. And in fact, many of them speak fluent English. One of those is a journalist called Oksana Boyko, who has a show on Russia Today. Oksana Boyko came to Pakistan to record this pre-visit interview with Imran Khan. And in that interview, at one point, it's a 28-minute interview. I will share a link with you. You can watch it. In that interview, she says at one place, she says that, look, it is the Chinese who made this outreach for you to the Russians possible. It's well known. And to that, Imran Khan nods in happy affirmation like this. So you know what we are talking about. Now, this 28-minute interview is very interesting, and I've picked up some lines from it here and there. You know, the problem with a lot of our media is, in fact, problem with all of us is, we are so consumed by our domestic politics that we completely forget the state of the world. You see our evening primetime channels, almost nobody is discussing any of this, and all of this will have a deep impact on our future and on the future of our children. But we are not bothered. But see now, what is it? What's the wisdom that we get from this 28-minute interview? So first of all, I am fascinated that Oksana Boyko starts this interview with a quote from Rumi. Now, as with Confucius, Sun Tzu, Kautilya, it's not always possible to authenticate a quote, because you can pretty much make up anything and say that so-and-so said it. So I don't know. I tried to Google it. I didn't find, at least in English, this quote, but she quotes it. So I'm sure she is right. She looks convincing and she sounds convincing. So she says 700 years ago, and that's how she's starting her interview with like her introduction, which she calls verbose later, sort of self-effacingly. And she says that 700 years ago, Sufi poet Rumi spoke these fantastic lines or great lines on the state of the world. And what are these lines? The lines are, quote, "Look how the caravan of civilization has been ambushed," right? Look how the caravan of civilization has been ambushed. Fools are everywhere in charge. I mean, you really want to say this to the Prime Minister of Pakistan today, but she says it, right? And I don't think she's being funny. I think she's saying it seriously. Look how the caravan of civilizations has been ambushed. Fools are everywhere in charge. Do not practice solitude like Jesus, right? Holy Jesus. Do not practice solitude like Jesus. Be in the assembly and take charge of the ship. Time has come for leaders to be captains of their own ships. And then she starts this conversation. So I thought this will go straight into leadership. But Imran Khan takes it straight into spirituality. And he says, look, I come from a spiritual place. I'm a very spiritual person. And then he gives a little philosophy. right? And philosophy he gives is that, see, from a moment human being is born, a human being has two questions. I mean, I might disagree with that. I think the moment a human being is born, the first thing is to maybe find something to drink or eat, basically mother's milk, right? I don't think a human being at that point is thinking spiritual questions, but anyway, Imran Khan says it, and these days he carries a rosary. So he says that every human being has two questions. One, what is the reason for my existence? Why am I existing, right? Why did I come into existence? And second, what will happen after I die, after my life ends? And he says the answers to these only lie in religion, because answers to these questions science cannot give, but every religion in the world gives it. Now the fact is, I haven't found anybody, so many holy people, etc., who actually say that I found this answer. Various people say various things, and depending on your shraddha and how much you believe the other person, you can believe or unbelieve. But that's how he starts. And then he's asked, what are the biggest problems in the world right now? He says, look, climate change is the one big one. That's easy, right? Because we have imperiled our existence, misused the blessings of God, etc. The second, he says, is the plunder of the developing world by their own elites. And he says that $1.5 trillion worth is taken out of the developing world or poor world by their political and other elites, and this is taken to Western countries, to developed economies, and they don't mind because this is just capital that's coming into their countries, right? So essentially he's hinting at America, because America prints the world's reserve currency, that's a dollar, and the whole world then goes and funds American deficit. So he says Western world, developed world doesn't care, this money comes to them. So until they stop these capital inflows and they start treating this the same way as terror money or drug money, our countries will not find a solution. So once again, the anchor, who is smart, she tries to bring it back to focus. And she says to Imran Khan that, look, Rumi also said, I mean, I never realized that there'll be so much Rumi. And she keeps on saying that I'm quoting a Sufi poet because you believe in Sufism. Now, Rumi's Sufism and the Sufism that Imran might believe it are of different type. In fact, even the understanding of spirituality between Rumi and many other Sufis might be different. Nevertheless, she says that Rumi also said that clever people want to change the world, while wise people try to change themselves. And she says that, look, you also realize that Pakistan and Russia have had a very fraught relationship all this while. They've hardly had a bilateral equation. They've usually seen each other through the prism of other powers in the world. And Imran Khan then goes on to say, yes, we were allies of the Americans, we had no choice, we were a poor country, we needed aid at that point, India was mostly neutral, thank you. But then he says that, but inclined towards Soviet Union, that's also accurate. And then he says this aid we got from America has actually become a big curse, because for any country, aid is the biggest curse. I'll even accept that, although I might raise questions about how did you get into such a mess and why are you still looking for aid, right? But going ahead, he said, we have now decided, Pakistan has now decided that Pakistan will never become part of any bloc. We were part of the American bloc. Once again, I might ask if Pakistan is today not in the China bloc. But he says we are not in any bloc and we'll never become part of any bloc because we suffered because of that. And he said, look, poverty is our big challenge, and then sort of gratuitously but predictably switches to India. He says poverty is our biggest challenge, and he says in Pakistan things are so bad, and then he comes to India, and I suspect it's difficult to say today that India is in a worse state than Pakistan economically. So he says, look at India. In India, instead of fighting poverty, there is a leadership of Narendra Modi, which now believes only in one thing, which doesn't care about pulling their people out of poverty, etc., which is selling only one line, that Hindus are the most superior race in the world. And then he goes on to say that this is terrible and this is destabilizing the region, to which the anchor then says, look. And you can see it's a Russian anchor, so she doesn't want India abuse too much on her channel. So she said, look, time comes when every country goes through a spell of nationalism. Now, thank you. I could tell you which country at this moment is going to the strongest spell of nationalism. That's her own, that's Russia. So she says every country goes through difficult phases when they go through strong spells of nationalism. So maybe that is not something that is so relevant. So in fact, she pushes back at Imran. So she pushes him back from his India Nazi Narendra Modi theme. And then she goes on to tell him that, look, you've said that you will not be a part of any camp politics. You've also said you can mediate between China and US to improve their relations. You really think such a thing is possible? Because you've said, she said that you will not be part of camp politics ever in Pakistan, but you will be like a bridge between camps. And I can see that Imran Khan is getting interested, and then she reminds him, a little bit of a spoiling effect. She says both Turkey and Ukraine have been saying the same thing, right? Does this really work? Can you be a bridge between the camps? So then Imran Khan says, I'm not a believer in military conflicts. Anybody who believes in military conflict has not read history, because military conflicts lead to nothing. And then there is a homily about the Afghan war and what the Americans get as a result of the Afghan war. Then he says Western leaders don't care about war because leaders want to stay in power. So what's a good little war in which other people die or some of your own people die, as long as it helps you stay in power? He says if a war can make you stay in power, for Western leaders, it's a good war. And he says that's because they do not come from a spiritual point of view. So once again we come to spirituality. Then he says Ukraine. He says Ukraine, nobody wants to go to war. Ukrainians don't want to go to war. Russians don't want to go to war. He's not saying about anything about sovereignty, etc., etc. Obviously, he won on the eve of his visit to Moscow. So he says it's a stupid question even to ask whether peace is better than a good war, right? So you should not have a war. Now she asks him again, but you see, it's the leaders. People in no country want war, including India and Pakistan. It's the leaders who perpetuate this, and they let these conflicts in limbo for decades. And are you going to remain, keep it like that? Because problem is not with human beings, problem is with leaders. You have your mutual grievances with India on Kashmir. How are you going to deal with it? So Imran Khan said, the first thing I did when I got elected was to reach out to India. And I said, let's talk and let's set up a timetable to resolve the Kashmir issue. Between us, there is no problem other than the Kashmir issue. Then he goes on to speak a line which I think he's spoken about every country that he's visited or he's talked about. He said, I'm the one who knows India better than anybody, even most Indian people. And then he goes on to say, and that is the reason when I reached out to India, I thought that Indians will respond well after I got elected. But then I realized this isn't the India I knew. This India has changed. This is now controlled by a mad ideology, a mad, stupid ideology inspired by the Nazis. You can on your phone go to the internet and you will find quotes from the founders of the RSS and BJP who praised Nazis, Hitlers, etc., etc. At which point the anchor again pushes back. Remember, it's Russian TV. It's Russia Today. Beyond a point, she can't let him abuse India because that causes consequences with India. Russia is also walking the tightrope here. So she pushes back and she says, look, there is always good nationalism and bad nationalism. And that depends on how you define it, etc., etc. But what will you do to resolve the differences? So Imran says, I am willing to invite Narendra Modi for a debate on TV, right? We can hold a debate on TV and let 1 billion people watch and we'll settle it in that debate. And she, of course, says, tongue in cheek, that Russia Today will be very happy to host that debate. It's a lot of money, right? A debate like that. So Imran Khan wants to solve the Kashmir problem in a debate with Narendra Modi on TV. Then she says, look, Jinnah, you are a country founded by Jinnah. And Jinnah believed in a combination of culture and modernity. Where do you stand with that now? And then Imran Khan said, everything has to come out of culture. He says, no country which has had a culture supplanted on it has survived. And then he says, that's what happened to our countries. Colonialists left us a little colonized elite, which were called westernized elite in my country. and the rest of the country had nothing to do with them. And that's precisely what happened with Iranian revolution. In Shah of Iran's times, a small elite became really rich and there was a revolt by the rest. I don't want it. And he said, I like the conservatism that Putin has, because Putin also wants modernity. At the same time, he likes Russian conservatism. So he says any nation can embrace modernity, but only if it keeps together its collective soul and its inner core, which comes from culture. And he says you can't have a system which is half modern, half your own original culture, because then, as he says, we say in Urdu, actually it's in Punjabi more than Urdu, Adha titar, adha bater, half a partridge, half a quail. So he says you can't be half a partridge, half a quail. That is a phrase that I might remind you. I mentioned earlier that Nawaz Sharif had once used with me in an interview about the political system in Pakistan, that either army should be in charge or we should be in charge. What is this system? Adha titar, adha bater, right? So that is the wisdom he gives Oksana. He goes on to say the nation we can learn most from is China. Now, this is the point at which the interviewer says there's been a subtle but significant role played by China now in bringing you closer to Russia and making this meeting possible. At which point Imran Khan nods in affirmation. Then she says, you keep saying that you can mediate between China and America, but how can you mediate? Because America does not want to settle anything. America wants to preserve their dominance. And if that is their idea, how can they make peace with China? To which Imran Khan says, America is very diverse, right? America is very diverse. There are elites who want war or who want to fight China, but there are also lots of other Americans who don't like it, like India. He says this is not the India of Nehru and Gandhi, but there are a lot of people in India also who want peace, not war, who don't agree with the ideology of those who are in charge of India. And then he says, a tiny, highly organized elite has seized control of India, just as the Nazis had done in Germany. There are sensible voices, but right now those are not being heard. And he says the same thing about America. Now, if Biden and his administration are American warmongers, then I think I have to go back to geopolitics ABC once again. Now, finally, she asks him that what is it that you will like to end up as? What will be your legacy? How will people remember you? And reminds him that he'll soon turn 70, at which point I realized that he and Putin are the same age. Putin is also about to turn 70. So they are both the same age. So he said, I would love to emulate China. His lifelong ambition and the legacy he wants to leave behind him is to emulate China. He says, I would love to emulate China, to lift people out of poverty under a rule of law, also have a strong, robust welfare system. And if I can do that, I will meet my maker with confidence. At which point this ends. You can watch the entire interview. I gave you an analytical description of it.